forward as well. Now, I just want to talk about Internet Society. The ISOC, as those who don't know, the Internet Society is 26 years old, or 27 years old this year. It was established in 1992. And I am currently on the board of trustees of the Internet Society. There are 12 members on the board of trustees. It's at a global level, and a term in the board of trustees is a 3-year term. And I am completing my first 3-year term in July this year. And you can run for it again. You can run for it a second time. And if you get into it, that's great. Then you have another 3 years, and that will be the extent of your contribution because you can only be a board member consecutive for 2 years, two terms, that's basically it. So that's that. So what does Internet Society do? We try to be the voice for the internet across the world. It's not only Singapore for that matter. The chapters are the people on the ground that does what needs to be done from a ground perspective. What is important from an internet point of view, from a local perspective. So in the case of Singapore, we don't have access as an issue. We don't have those kinds of motherhood issues to worry about, but we do have higher level issues to think about, like policy, access controls, all those things that are important as well. And so this is where the societies, the chapters can then take on a specialized role or the areas of interest, and you find a lot of the stuff Internet Society Singapore chapter has done is in the policy side. So if I think that's been very useful. We have given enough feedback to government and many other local agencies about policy and stuff like that. So this will be another one of those activities that Internet Society chapter can do. So that's about all I'm going to say. But if you're not already an ISOC member at a chapter level, please consider signing up. The more, the merrier. And and we really look to your areas of interest, what makes sense to you, and why this will be important to you as an organization and as a area that you can offer your expertise as well. So with that, let's get the round table going in a relatively straight tables here.
Thank you, Harish. So tonight, before we start on discussing the the cybersecurity guide, we have Indranil Mukherjee, who is the director of ISC Squared Singapore chapter, among many other things that he does, to share with us a bit briefly on IoT cybersecurity from a standards viewpoint. After this, then we'll do the discussion. So please welcome Indy.
Thank you. I guess the Internet Society is a lot about, when we talk about policy, these days the discussion is often interconnected with what are the standards out there, because a policy will often refer to an international standard. These standards can come from a political standpoint. That means you want to do business with the US, let's follow the US standards. You want to work with the US provider, they are automatically aligned with a US standard. You want to work with the more controversial decisions around Huawei, and encryption standards, all get us in line with the fact that standards, policy, and confusion around them creates confusion around policy. So to clarify that, being on a uniform framework, policy, and standards are important. Obviously, one of the key things that the Internet Society does has been in getting IPv6, both from a capacity management perspective as well as enabling IoT for across the real world web. So whether we see these applications from edge routers, which are kind of delivering the content on your mobile devices as we speak, from the creation of some of the world's biggest companies, not to take any names, or the open source ones where we are located now, enabling this transformation to happen. If we'll often your location finders, your weather, your applications, your temperature sensors, light switches, Internet of Things is more ubiquitous than you think. Any of you who watched BBC Click last week would have seen how it's possible to hack into anyone's house using their electric kettle, because it's cold in the UK right now, or in the US. Many of them want a hot cup of tea, so they've internet enabled their electric kettles so they can get a warm cup of tea or coffee or some other drink. You know, you add your whiskey or something else when you get home in the evening. And how hackers were able to hack not just anything, but use the electric kettle as a medium of attack, so long as it was IP enabled. Again, they talked about creating, in this case, IPv4, you know, from a standards perspective, tunnels within IPv6. So that was one of the attack vectors. If you look at SCADA, we have the famous example of Stuxnet, where the Siemens PLC controllers, where it's all started. The world's first cyber-physical attacks in 2009, where the nuclear centrifuges at Natanz in Iran, and which were basically spun using Siemens PLCs, were attacked with a very, very specific targeted attack. This was the world's first weapon or cyber weapon made entirely out of code. So whether we are looking at an entry point into cyber warfare, whether we are talking about an entry point into each of our houses through our smart TVs, our electric kettles, our IP cameras, or even our navigation maps. Today, we have the capacity with IoT to both do good and create a lot of convenience, but there is also the fear factor of the security in a lot of these legacy devices not meeting the standards, where even an amateur hacker can purchase these tools off the dark web and can launch an attack on your home, your car, your enterprises, or even worse, from a nation state perspective, oil pipelines or the electricity grid. What are some of the issues that could arise from not having these standards? For example, there are inherent vulnerabilities in security code. When you design many of these older controllers, whether it's our air conditioning systems, whether these are our CCTV cameras, our edge routers, have third-party libraries where we may not be able to control the security of the code, or may have not been designed with security in mind. The issue of open unsecure network ports continues to be an issue which is prevalent across open wired or wireless points in the Internet of Things. Then there is the issue of protocols. Having network protocols which are not secure and then connecting onto them through cloud or mobile apps which are ubiquitous constitute new attack vectors, which, along with very, very sophisticated hackers and the rise of a new kind of cyber attack called crime as a service, which means that the criminal gangs now know that 99.99999%, the 7 nines of the world's wealth is in cyberspace. So if you have an insecure attack vector from the Internet of Things, you, rather than go for conventional smuggling or conventional attacks, it's better sometimes to do, for example, earlier the attacks were on credit cards or conventional desktops and laptops. But if I can hack into your home through your electric kettle or through your smart TV, how much smarter can the criminals gangs be? If I want to get at $81 million through a swift attack, I can have the entry point through an IoT device. So these are newer attack vectors where even unsophisticated criminal gangs can hire the services of hackers and hacking tools to make unauthorized system changes, take advantage of insecure network protocols or cloud apps, and use existing vulnerabilities and sometimes open and secure network ports to get a greater sophistication and range of attacks. A clear example is we are now, for example, something called a Patch Tuesday. So technically, this happens around Wednesday morning Singapore time. So if you are on one of those closed source systems, not the open source ones, typically you would find your system slowing down on a Wednesday morning with a conventional laptop or desktop. That might also happen on your mobile devices now or your smart TVs. What is happening is the security vulnerabilities that have been found are being pushed on through remote agents onto either your Internet of Things devices, IoT devices, or onto your desktop, laptop, even, for example, your ATM machines. Earlier, these were a few kilobytes in size, but as the range and sophistication of attacks have gone from a few hundred to 144,000 on an average new attack vectors per week, you can see the patch sizes and the frequency of patch, whether emergency upgrades or in terms of the range of vulnerabilities these are expected to cover, being a lot more. See, for instance, whether you are an Android user, an Apple user, or any other standard mobile OS, how frequent your upgrades are, how many of those are driven by security vulnerabilities. That itself gives you a clue that if you've been a mobile user for enough of a period of time, that these security vulnerabilities have increased. Obviously, one of the base parameters is that because Internet of Things has been the subject of a lot of legacy devices connecting onto the internet, they weren't designed to be secure in the first place. The additional factor is most people are not aware whether you're using a cloud service or an Internet of device, you are only as strong as the keys that you store and use. Often you would only have to look at any vendor and see that the reasons of IoT devices or otherwise not taking off, or the ecosystem of devices not achieving its full potential, could be the fact that these devices, while they offered convenience, somebody used their security loopholes and did not enable the full convenience of the range of solutions to come in. From an evolution perspective, we can see that we have an open standards reference model on the network for those who are familiar. And you can see that there are standards. So what are some of, is there a laser pointer? Okay. So you can see there. Yeah. Okay. So while we have the IPv6 forum, we have the ISO through IEC committees, the IEEE, the IETF, all of them have created various protocols and standards, for example, to address vulnerabilities from a physical or what is called the MAC address, the network functionality, the communications layer, which is often a medium for side channel attacks, and the application layer. So this for anyone, we could have a deep dive on these discussions in a separate one-to-one. But from when you want to look at a standards perspective, one needs to look at what are the standards gaining traction from a global perspective, because this can also help us create an IoT ecosystem that policymakers could use to frame into meaningful laws, into meaningful acts that would enable greater convenience without the drawbacks of security that have hampered the growth of IoT devices. To start with, some people said the laissez-faire model. Let's self-regulate ourselves. The people who are behind the self-regulation. So all of us are only as strong as a weakest link approach. So let's have a best practice user. So you have something called the IoT Security Foundation. You could, if you look up any search engine, and they actually offer a certification called a best practice user certification for a whole range of devices. How effective it is how would depend. Would you trust a self-regulated best practice user who says, my electric kettle cannot be hacked because I am certified as a best practice user? Another approach is a top-down government approach as driven by the federal government. Let's have a core baseline as per the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST in the US, where any devices for use in the federal government, for example, has to be certified on what is called the Federal Information Processing Standards, FIPS. The most famous FIPS devices are called the cryptographic devices, which is the FIPS 140.2 range of cryptographic standards which affect IoT security. These contain both the principles as well as now there is work on a new IoT cybersecurity framework. While this is still in a draft stage, it is expected to be integrated into federal procurement laws which govern IoT security. These are already there for all the major federal cloud programs and are expected under the Federal Information System Management Act to be extended to all arms of the US government and the states. These all integrate with what the US works with the OECD on the cyber resilience framework. So cybersecurity, the politically correct term for it, because cybersecurity breeds fear, when the same people wear their bankers' ties and go to Davos the World Economic Forum becomes cyber resilience. So this is, we're learning some new politically correct terminology from Davos. So no more fear mongering through cyber security. Let's build up cyber resilience. A word that is probably far more acceptable is the word trust. Because what are we actually trying to do? How many people in the non-English speaking world understand big words like resilience? Security is synonymous with the word trust. And that trust is an ISOC initiative. There is something for IoT devices and makers within the Online Trust Alliance. This obviously keeps the multi-stakeholder view, which includes ISO, and covers, most important, something the ISO standards don't cover in such great detail, which means looking at implementation issues on the ground using ISOC's area of specialty, which is security, upgradability, and patching. Because what are the core issues with the vulnerability slide that we saw earlier? One is people were not designing with security in mind. So when you are working with a legacy device and you just converted it into the internet and the patch sizes are getting bigger, what do you need to do? First, you need to upgrade the devices to be able to take the larger patch sizes into account, and obviously you need to build a trust in terms of an ecosystem and a formal alliance that recognizes mutual trust across the ecosystem of devices. This is what the ISOC initiative through Online Trust Alliance seeks to accomplish. Then look at, while ISOC is looking at it from the ground up approach, often nation states or governments sign up to the ISO standards because those are the ones that the top-down approach. So obviously ISOC and ISO work together, both looking at multi-stakeholders, but with fairly different emphasis areas. So you have a special committee called ISO IAC JTC1 and a subcommittee called Subcommittee 41. They, if you want to look this up, just look up the search word JTC1 SC41 and you will see 20 published standards which one could use in current laws, because these are published standards which can be used for the basis of laws that can be implemented to get a safe ecosystem. However, from the practical implementations of the NIST Cyber Security Framework, who used some of these ISO standards, as the new IoT devices evolve, you realize there are new vulnerabilities taking place, and the standards need to keep pace with the evolution of IoT devices. So there are 12 new standards under development, and this is the current state of IoT cyber security as we begin our roundtable discussion today. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I hope you found this backdrop discussion useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. This is very, very, very helpful. I learned a lot, so good. I didn't really know much to start with. So we are going to go into the discussion on the cybersecurity guide. And by way of background, if you just to make sure that we're all on the same page, there is a public consultation paper out by IMDA, and they are seeking views from the public, which is us. And if you've already given in your own written submissions, that's great. But what we are doing as Internet Society Singapore chapter is to collect views from as many people as we can, and then we are going to compile them and submit them to the IMDA as part of the consultation process. So the
When's the due date for that?
The due date is end of the week.
End of this week.
I think so. Yeah, but you know, I think last month everybody was busy. So the way we're going to do it is participants are free to use the information received, but the identity or the affiliation of speakers and other participants should not be revealed. So feel free to say whatever you want to say. I'm going to stop the recording so that you don't have to worry about being attributed. If you want to be attributed, by all means tell us your name, your designation, your organization. We're happy to get to know you as well. But we will not cite your identity unless you give us your explicit consent. Yeah. So please feel free to discuss freely. So with that, I'm going to now bring us to a document which we'll use for the discussion, and there are several.
Do you have a link on a Google Doc or something like that?
Okay, I didn't make it open to all because we'll have like a whole bunch of people all typing in at the same time. So I will scribe, and please start throwing in your ideas for question 1. So let's start with question 1, and we will stop the recording. Okay, stop.